Somehow I was fascinated with the tools that they use for navigation at sea. Because those days we never had anything called GPS. That even today, only about 25-30% of the world world's oceans have actually been surveyed.
What has been the most challenging areas to map?
Kargil. I headed a team of surveying there during the Kargil operations. We were dropped by helicopter on an island. We had this big monitor lizard. It was 7 feet long.
Right.
Came walking across and we climbed up a tree. We had about 200 garden lizards, those girgits,
Right.
all over, including, and we were trying to, shoo them off from our hull. We found around 15 snakes. And from the top, we could see a 7-8 meter long shark circling around.
Oh my god.
Here in India, we've got a problem with Pakistan. We've got a problem with Bangladesh. Most glaring example is of South China Sea. Today, technology is available for going deeper into the sea for oil exploration. They're talking of mining, deep sea mining for nodules.
Right.
All these things are exploitation of the resources. They don't know whether it is there or not, but everybody wants the maximum slice of the cake.
मेंटालिटी के एक फ्रेश एपिसोड में आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। मैं हूं आपका दोस्त यश ठाकुर। आज हमारे साथ गेस्ट हैं वाइस एडमिरल विनय भदवार। उनका 35 इयर्स ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस है इंडियन नेवी में। बहुत सारी बातें आज करेंगे, सो स्टिक टू द एपिसोड। थैंक यू सर। जस्ट टू स्टार्ट ऑफ विद, इफ यू कुड tell us a little bit about your early days in the Indian Navy and how did you come about choosing the Indian Navy as a career, and what was the early life like? If you could just take us through that, sir.
Did my schooling in Dehradun from St. Joseph's, and that is the time we appeared for NDA, and luckily I cleared that exam, went through the entire process and joined NDA in 78. After that, training in NDA, then we went in for naval training for about a year, and that's where I started getting to know what the Navy is all about, because I come from an army background, so didn't have any clue about the Navy. Once we finished the initial training, then I was posted on board INS Rajput. That time a frontline destroyer. It had just joined the Navy after acquisition from Russia. And it was a very prestigious ship for me to, start my career in the Navy. And in fact, there I had a lot of good experiences. Got my watchkeeping certificate. That is basically qualifies you to do an independent watch on board a ship,
Right.
a warship. And after that, my next appointment was on a small patrol boat in which I was operating in the Park Bay area. That was during the LDT problems. And
So that would be what year, sir?
this would be 84, 83.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
At that time, by then I had enough exposure into the Navy, and somehow I was fascinated with the tools that they use for navigation at sea.
Right.
Because those days we never had anything called GPS.
Right.
It had just been introduced,
Right.
and very limited sets were available in the Navy at that time.
Right.
Only the initial part, and not much of attention was being paid to them. In fact, we were doing the traditional navigation.
Right.
So that was a kind of fascination for me, and therefore I opted for the hydrographic branch.
Right.
That's how I started my career in the hydrographic branch, to do something, where you yourself are personally involved
Right.
In the work. And I had a good hand also, so drawing charts with those.
So that
Indian
came just
ink,
naturally to you.
Yeah, we used to use crocals for writing all the, in fact, making the charts.
Right.
We call them charts in
Right.
naval parlance.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
You said that you had this inclination towards the Indian Navy, and you wanted to get into the mapping of the water bodies and all. What were the complexities in managing and mapping the water bodies? What was it like?
See, at that time, the technology was a little rudimentary. If you go through history, you see the method of using sound for detecting targets, etc., originated during the Second World War. And that translated also into finding the depth with the same principles. And it was, I mean, in 80s, it was just about 30-year-old technology. Limitations were there in the systems. They were costly, hard to maintain, and ranges were less, and things like that. So these added to the complexities at that time.
Right.
So much so that even today, only about 25-30% of the world's oceans have actually been surveyed.
That's about it.
Yeah,
Only a quarter of.
Yeah, because you be using this method of sound ranging, which we call sonar or echo sounding.
Right.
This it had serious limitations. You've got to be physically on top of the point where you need to measure.
Right.
So now you can't keep going across the whole world doing it.
Right.
And obviously most of the sea areas are irrelevant to shipping or any other human activity.
Right.
So they've been generally ignored.
Right.
As a result, only 20-25% of the sea areas have been actually surveyed, which have some relevance to navigation and human exploitation. That is the state. So we are now, the International Hydrographic Office has kind of set its targets of what is called Seabed 2030, that they want to push. It's a cooperative mechanism where all countries will contribute towards surveying the world's oceans, and they hope to complete it by 2030, which is unlikely because the calculations itself for the number of ship hours and ship years required is tremendous. Nobody is going to put in that much resources.
Right. On the navigation part, if you could just give us some information on what the navigation and the legal political aspects of mapping.
Historically speaking, the oceans have been treated as common heritage. But now United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas, this originated around, there was talk about it, this thing, and finally in 1982 they managed to get the whole thing ratified and agreed by most of the countries. What it says basically is that oceans being the common heritage, there is freedom of navigation. Everybody, it is for the common use of everybody. But along the coast, you have certain distances from the coast, which is how to measure that is defined in this thing, that you will have varying levels of jurisdiction. This is basically, the reason was that you see things like law enforcement, smuggling, policing, or pollution, etc. Since it next to on the beach will obviously affect the land adjoining the beach. So therefore these zones were made. That is the territorial sea, where you have total jurisdiction on it, and so on and so forth, and economic zone where you see the river sediments flowing down from your land would have probably over millions of years deposited into the sea. So actually the discussion was basically you have the rights over that.
Right.
And now it even extends up to the continental shelf. Because to give you an example, there's the Bengal fan where the Ganges and through Bangladesh it goes down.
Right.
It extends right down south of up to south of Sri Lanka.
Right, sir.
The sediment has been for millions of years got deposited into this area. up to south of this thing. So the resources are going to be claimed by all of us.
Right.
You
Right.
see, including Bangladesh,
Right.
to a certain extent Myanmar, to a certain extent,
Right.
but mainly Sri Lanka and this thing with the special rules are there. So UNCLOS lays down all these rules. Now within that, there is also rules or agreed conventional this thing about piracy, pollution, and these kind of related maritime laws for handling this freedom of navigation and a common heritage for the fish stocks.
Right. Right.
Fish stocks are because migratory, they don't know any boundaries. So you can't land up in a situation which is now being talked about.
Right.
Is you can't, take or extract all the fish stocks from here, deplete them so that other neighboring countries might have effects on their livelihood and their fish stock.
Right.
That kind of a thing.
So what it's you've been in the Navy for such a long time. What has been, in your opinion, the most challenging areas to map?
Kargil.
Okay.
This may be a surprise to you.
Yes. So
Naval hydrographers. I headed a team for surveying there during the Kargil operations.
so how does that work? If you could just explain how
That
does
was
that work?
basically to in aid of the artillery.
Okay.
So we had the modern equipment, etc., and which could be deployed quickly. And so the entire LOC and LAC, including Siachen, we had covered.
Okay.
Now, that survey that we did, basically laying the foundation of that survey, was done, I think, after about 1860s or so.
Right.
So that was difficult because of obvious reasons, the weather and the altitude, etc. And of course, partly because of the war that was going on with
Right.
Pakistan. And then, of course, coming back to the sea, Andamans during the late 80s and the early 90s, our hydrographic effort was concentrating on mapping of Andaman Islands. Now, the technology at that time, once again, like GPS, was just about getting introduced.
This is, you're talking about the 70s, 80s.
Late 80s
Late
and early
80s.
90s. So at that time, you see, resources were limited. That those areas were virgin territory. So it was a little difficult to manage there because local tribes and things like that. The terrain is very hostile. So that was a little challenging. Yeah, navigating between those islands and surveying them. Wildlife was an issue.
Why is that, sir?
To give you an example, we were dropped by helicopter on an island, that is Sink Island. It is just south of Port Blair. And while I was, we had finished off our work and we sat down for lunch, which we carried in tiffins, took a break for lunch. As we opened this thing, I don't know whether it was the food, smell of food, what attracted it. We had this big monitor lizard. It was 7 feet long.
Right.
With the forked tongue.
Right.
It came walking across and we climbed up a tree.
Oh.
And this guy came.
So it was that big?
It was about 6-7 feet long.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And slow moving. We didn't know, we were first seeing it for the first time, and it is undergrowth all around, so you don't have a place to run other than we climbed up the tree. Next thing is, after this guy walked away, then we got down to eat, and you won't believe it, the three of us sitting with one and a half tiffins, we had about 200 garden lizards. those girgits
Right.
all over, including, and we were trying to, shoo them off from our food.
Right.
That was one part.
Right.
Second was in Tilungchong Island. Tilungchong Island has got a small little rock down south where we had decided to clear the undergrowth for a helicopter landing. So we landed by boat and climbed up. By about 10 o'clock, we took a break because everybody was chopping trees and bushes, etc. We were to clear an area of about 15 yards by 15 yards approximately for the helicopter to land and to plane it up. So when we were taking a break at around 10:30, it was like you and me sitting here. It was all rocky boulders. Somebody pointed out there's something under the rock where he was sitting. So he got up, he moved the rock, and he found a 5 feet long sea snake.
Sea snake.
Yeah. Now everybody started looking around for snakes. And we, in an area of about 10 yards by 10 yards, which we had cleared by then, we found around 15 snakes. Okay. So those 15 snakes, we had actually, because there's nowhere to run because we were a team of about 10-15 in that 10 yard by 10 yard. We didn't know all this. And they were dangerous looking colors, of these snakes.
And were they venomous?
Must be. We don't know. We never tested them. So we pinned them down and one by one, some were killed, some were picked up and thrown into the sea. Down below from that rock, about 10 meters down.
Right.
So there was a boat in waiting for us, for communications. It was waiting. So when we threw these snakes into the water, after about 10 minutes, we saw that the boat crew was standing right on top, wide awake. And from the top, we could see a 7-8 meter long shark circling around.
Oh my God.
Eating those snakes. Probably. So, that is the kind of terrain Andamans is and was. I don't know now.
Right.
There are wild crocodiles in places.
In Andamans.
The entire Andamans is full of these sea crocodiles. They're very dangerous guys.
Right.
So that is one more challenge.
Right.
In those days.
Right.
And then, of course, as far as the sea conditions are concerned, Gujarat is one of the most challenging places. The Gulf of Kambat.
Right.
This place has got very strong currents, shifting sandbanks, and in fact, nothing holds in those waters. Even modern day shipping is difficult to handle. There are better options than going into the Gulf of Kambat for trade and
because of the
shipping.
currents,
because of current, shifting banks, etc. Because the water just takes away everything.
Right.
And the surprising part is that these very Gulf of Kambat was the main trading route for Surat.
Right.
During the 1800s.
Right.
And people didn't have engines at that time. They were all on oars and hats off to those people.
Right.
Hats off to those people there.
Right.
How they managed to go up the Gulf of Kambat right up to Surat and Narmada River.
Right.
That is what I keep telling used to tell my officers, I said, look, those guys have done it with oars. And here you got all the technology and the engines, and yet you're finding it difficult to handle this.
Right. The technology used for mapping the waters and all of that, what goes into the genesis of the technology used for mapping, and how has technology advanced in the years from when you were in the services to now?
Basically, on land, you can use electromagnetic waves.
Right.
And that is in the form of a radar. Now, for the past few decades, satellite imagery and I would say photogrammetry, etc., are being used for mapping the land. At sea, what has happened is, like I told you, during the Second World War, sound is the only medium which can be used for measuring distances,
Right.
etc., in water.
Right.
You send a ping and you get back a return, and you
Right.
measure the distance measure the speed divided by you get the distance.
Right.
That is the method. This technology has continued till somewhere around the 1980s, where you see, but they managed to create something called a side scan sonar, which is basically processing of your return echoes from the targets. It's like this, that some items are very reflective, some are not so reflective, or they absorb
Right.
sound.
Right.
So that gives a different shade, the intensity of return of your this thing, which helps the user like us to
Right.
identify what is the item
Right.
or differentiate between
Right.
two different items. With this technology in the 70s and 80s, the side scan sonar, what happened is we were using it for detection of wrecks and other obstructions.
Right.
While echo sounding was vertical depth, kitni hai, for measurement of the. Now, today what has happened is that the systems are so advanced. We have got what is called a multi-beam echo sounding system.
Right.
This multi-beam echo sounding system is basically sends out a fan and then collects the data in each ping. And it gives you a range which is about 7 to 8 times
Right.
of your depth.
Right.
So means if you are in 1 kilometer of depth water, you'll get 7-8 kilometers of seabed mapped at each time. It is like that same principle like what the satellite does for mapping. They have the rotating mirrors which scan as the satellite moves forward, so it keeps scanning and you get a picture built up.
Right.
Like this, it keeps pinging and you keep moving, so it keeps building up the picture as you move.
Right.
In spite of this technology, we will still take about at least half a century, if not more, to cover the entire world. Because today, there's a very famous saying that we know more about the moon. We have mapped the moon better than our own oceans.
Right. Right. The irony of
Yes, because of the serious limitations that the sea water poses on the medium to measure. And that is only sound is the only thing which comes with its own limitations.
Right.
There's no other option. But today they are trying out with satellite imagery for shallow waters, and it's not yet an accepted method, but work is in progress in using satellite data for this thing.
Right.
Depth measurement. Not so accurate, but let's see how it.
When we talk about mapping the water bodies and all of that, what does it take to create these navigating charts and all of that? If you could just explain.
So now
that.
I've given you what is with the data collection is the basic
Right.
Now when this data comes, you see, earlier we used to be doing it all manually, recording. Look at the display में देखो कितना डेप्थ है, 6 मीटर है, 6 मीटर लिख लो, ऐसे करके पोजीशन क्या है वो भी लिख लो. Today, what is happening is all of it is automated. You plugged in computers and they do the recording. Till about 25-30 years ago, the formats were not matured. Today, industry standards have come up for all this. So what happens is it's a good thing that today you can buy equipment from X and from B and marry them together to a certain extent.
Right.
Earlier, this never used to happen. I went through that phase where we learned Unix, to use Unix systems, because DOS computers and
One out there.
Windows was non-existent, and DOS computers were not able to handle the speeds and the intensity of calculations and things. So we used Unix. Now Unix had its own problems, that after 2 years you can't find the spare parts of those.
Right.
And the language also used to change from one manufacturer to the other. There were
Right.
various versions of Unix.
Right.
But today, as of today, I know Unix better than Windows,
Right.
because I was born and brought up during that time.
During that time.
But the problem was that you see, we were a high intensity tech requirements. So we lived with Unix for a short time, and we had to throw it out of the window, because then Windows systems came up which were equally powerful.
Right.
Then those days we used to have even electrical systems which were run by computers.
Right.
For they were semi-manual. Electronics were very rudimentary, but these computers used to trigger electrical signals to move the thing. There's something what happens in the robots today, where a motor is moved by the things like that. But those days only by Unix, not by Windows.
Right. Right.
So calculations were done. So we had these Unix machines, etc., which used to do the work, and even production of chart. Then once the data comes to Dehradun, then PAS systems used to take on.
So, how are these charts in naval strategy and defense planning made?
The National Hydrographic Office has got a mandate from the government of India to, as per international requirements, to ensure safety of navigation, and for that we produce all the publications, including the charts. Those are used internationally and by our Indian Navy as well.
Right.
But any specific requirements for the Navy are being met without going into the public domain, as per the requirements of the Navy. So that's how we produce those charts, based on the data that we have. Right. Or we get from some from the Navy, etc., and compile it together and put it for the this.
Something which intrigues me, sir, I want to know about oceanography. If you can just throw some light on the role of oceanography.
Okay. Oceanography, basically, meteorology and oceanography are two related subjects. There's a lot of work going on in India for the study of monsoons, and worldwide there's enough. So your basically computing systems today require legacy data, real-time data collection to be fed in, so that they can forecast.
Right.
You have to first know what was the past, and then start predicting what is going to be the future. So for that, Met and oceanography,
meteorological
Met is basically weather, humidity,
yes.
temperature, great temperature gradients, wind speeds, etc.
Right.
And oceanography is also related, the same thing in the water,
right,
where you have salinity, temperature gradients, etc., and other biological and non-biological phenomena which happen in the sea. The whole purpose of all this is to understand what is the effect of the sea conditions on the weather,
right,
and vice versa,
right,
and therefore in totality, how do they affect naval operations? Because at the end of the day, we are using sound for detection of submarines, etc.
Right.
So that is where oceanography becomes a very important part. Hydrography is basically the physical measurement of this thing. We don't do any predictions, etc. Yet we do collect data, related data in our area wherever we are operating for that duration of time, and which goes back into the basic databases for future requirements of any.
If you could just give us some insights on while you were mapping these waters, were there any disputed areas where you could or you didn't, or there were certain restrictions that you couldn't map certain areas, If you could just throw some light on that.
See, first of all, Government of India and the Indian Navy doesn't go into any disputed areas, contested areas, unless there is a contest with us only. Then the decision is taken at a very high level whether a ship will enter that. Otherwise, for diplomatic reasons, we normally don't operate in any disputed area.
Right.
As far as disputes are concerned, I think I would say about 80% of the countries are having disputes
in the waters,
and, in their definition of their maritime boundaries.
Maritime boundaries.
Here in India, we've got a problem with Pakistan. We've got a problem with Bangladesh. And the most glaring example is of South China Sea.
South China Sea. Yes.
That is the most glaring example of what a dispute can become.
Right. So they've had this contentious issue for a very long time with Taiwan and.
You see, one of the main things is that since last 10-15 years, United Nations has come up with UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
What is the main requirement of having these promulgated sustainable? It is basically to ensure that with so much of human activity around the world, you got to protect your waters and make it sustainable. The earth as a whole to be sustainable. And it cannot be done without ensuring the safety of the seas and oceans. Like I was telling you that I overfish in my area will have some ecological effect in your this thing.
Right.
Where people are talking about, sharks getting depleted now.
Right.
And that food chain is affected. Overfishing or underfishing, whales also is a similar issue. So now these sustainable development goals are the ones which, talk of how we can work together to ensure that the future of the oceans remains sustainable. Every resource, etc., remains sustainable. Today, technology is available for going deeper into the sea for oil exploration. They are talking of mining, deep sea mining for nodules.
Right.
All these things are exploitation of the resources.
Right.
And then everybody is fighting for it. They don't know whether it is there or not, but everybody wants the maximum slice of the cake as per the rules. One of the differences is that land boundaries, you can always, if there's a dispute between two countries, you can always sit down across the table and do it. And there is no third party involved. Unless, of course, you want to go to the International Court of Justice, etc., etc.
Right.
But in the maritime, this thing, the process is very simple, that you've got to first agree to go to the court with your dispute. Both parties have to agree to go to the court. The court will only agree to your, not court, I would say that, let's say first you have to both agree to that this is your demarcation line.
Right.
Then it will be accepted internationally.
Right.
As per they will only look at it that you've complied with all the rules which are laid down for such demarcation. Both the country. They've got no objection. If two parties have agreed to this thing, they will promulgate that internationally. Implications of it are tremendous. That you got your boundary, this thing. Now you can freely go and exploit as per the laid down rules. Exploit the resources in that water column or this thing, whichever is applicable to. But in case you have a dispute, then both parties have to go together.
Right.
To the for jurisdiction.
Right.
Judicial. That agreement has to be there between the two.
Right.
It happened with us with Bangladesh.
Right.
But in the case of China, Philippines went to the court and China remained out.
Right.
So now they say it's null and void.
Right.
I mean, you can, whatever the court's findings or this thing are, that doesn't matter.
Right.
I am not party to it. Here are the rule book.
Right. Over the course of your career, have there been any discoveries that you've made through mapping and through your career? Any major discoveries or any stories on those
Discoveries, or I would say
findings or whatever?
findings, yeah.
Findings.
Within our own waters, I have, come upon some sea mounts.
Sea mounts.
Sea mounts. Sea mounts is basically, in a flat area, you have a huge rock, which
Okay.
can come up to, which can, from the seabed, it can reach up to heights of about 1 kilometer or so.
Oh, right.
In about 3,000 meters of water,
Right.
which was earlier never detected.
Okay.
Courtesy satellite imagery, we have found some wrecks earlier unknown in the Andamans, in the shallow waters, in the corals, etc., stranded over there. So suddenly the imagery shows
Right.
an odd wreck and things
Right.
like that. But
Shipwreck shot of
shipwrecks. But the best one was in Lakshadweep, where we found some remnants of an old British ship, 1800s ship, which had run aground into the corals,
Right.
and then sunk along because corals have got very steep slopes, so it had sunk. It was I was part of that team which discovered that.
Right. Right.
So, we were hydrographers, but the divers did the work for that.
Right.
It was quite deep.
Right.
So they just found some remnants, and rest of it must have disappeared with time or whatever, sunk down.
Right.
So, like this, like I told you, like 20%, 25%
But there is only mapped.
So there's yet a lot to be discovered.
Discovered.
In fact, some of the international meetings that we've attended, the most busiest shipping route is through the Red Sea, where the Houthi problem is taking place.
Right.
Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, during their detailed hydrographic surveys, which they undertook, they discovered numerous rocks and sea mounts, in the which were never detected till today.
Sir, if you could just throw some light on the challenges on the accuracy of the charts and all of that. How accurate are those? Are they like pinpoint accurate, or there's some dispute to that also?
See, we are going through a process of continuously revising the accuracy standards depending on the kind of equipment that is coming up from the industry. What principle they basically follow is probability and the range of error in your navigation charts defines the quality of the survey. So what happens is, we, along with the survey work that we do, we have to define the quality of survey.
Right.
Which defines the probability of not encountering any dangers. Probability.
Right.
And it's not a fixed figure.
Right.
And it's just a probability
Right.
that it tells the user how careful you have to be in the waters.
Right.
And on the other side, it is whether you are doing full sea floor coverage or not. Means you're not missing out any spot which has not been illuminated. We call it illumination.
Right.
Every spot in the sea is there. Now, this kind of illumination, 100% illumination with overlapping, so to ensure that, at the edges, there is no gaps, etc. This takes a lot of time and effort. So this is normally done in places where your shipping is high density.
Right.
Traffic,
Right.
harbors, ports,
Right.
things like that.
Right.
And not in the open ocean, because you know that whether it is 3,000 meters depth or 3,100 meters depth doesn't make a difference. As long as the top 50, 20 meters, 30 meters is clear, For normal shipping, it's okay.
Right.
Of course, drafts are now increasing, so it can go up to 40-50 meters also, ships. But that is the general principle. So they don't concentrate. That is why, like, once again, 70% of the world oceans have not been. So
Right. It takes a lot of time, effort, energy, inclination to map the waters and all of that. And it takes, how do I put this? Extreme technological advancements to take place to be able to map the international waters. So have there been any technological achievements and progress in this field?
see, we with a small branch in the National Hydrographic Office, and as far as technology is concerned, we don't do manufacturing and scientific experiments for improving things. The few systems that we require, we normally purchase them off the shelf, either from India or from abroad, wherever is
Right.
this thing, because we need it immediately and in limited numbers.
Right.
But there's a lot of work in progress for worldwide on the technology to basically undertake detailed surveys. I'll give you an example. If you remember that that Malaysian Airlines,
Yeah, that went missing. That went missing.
370 or whatever.
Something. It was, I think, 370.
Whatever.
Yeah, that
which
went-
disappeared.
That
And its
disappeared. Correct.
probability is in the Indian Ocean somewhere.
Right.
I met some people who were associated with it. The equipment that they are using, it was of our interest, because
Right.
that kind of an equipment is what is the enlarged version of what we are using.
Right.
Just to give you an example of how tedious this survey work is, especially in those depths. You have for that equipment, which is around about 2 meters by about 4-5 meters, just an estimate, 5 meters, and weighing a few 1 or 2 tons. It is sent with a cable. If you're if you're looking for an sunken aircraft in 3,000 meters of water, it will require about, my estimate is around 7-8 kilometers of cable.
7-8 kilometers
Of cable to hold this equipment so that it is close to the seabed.
seabed. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And for that process, for it to be lowered it takes hours, nearly a day to stream it out.
Right.
Second thing is, before you deploy this, you require to do a complete survey so that you know if there are any obstructions down below.
Right.
So, but this system shouldn't get snagged with a seamount or hit the seabed.
Right.
So you got to do a detailed survey of that area.
Right.
And then once we normally do a line and then another line, the search is normally carried out that way. And then when that ship with this 7-8 kilometers of line it is towing, when it has to turn around and return on a parallel path, it takes half a day to turn it.
Right. That long. Right.
Otherwise, if they turn immediately, the system will sink.
Right.
You are in 3,000
Right.
meters and you got a 8 kilometer cable.
Right.
So you got to turn in steps so that this system doesn't sink. Otherwise, you'll have to pull it up and again put it down. So that itself is a big
Right.
So that is the kind of effort that it involves in today's. Just that is why they're not able to locate that aircraft.
Right. Thank you so much. It was a riveting conversation. We've learned so much, and for the viewers also, it's been a learning session from you. Thank you so much for taking out time to have this conversation with us. It was a pleasure to have a conversation. So guys, ये थी हमारी conversation with Vice Admiral Vinay Bhadwar. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please like, share, subscribe to The Mentality.